we'd like to quickly introduce you. So I'll leave you, Marcela, to introduce Alberto. I will quickly introduce Vitor. That we understand that both of you don't need to be introduced for a Brazilian audience, but Vitor is actually the current commissioner at Cade. He has a PhD in Universidade de São Paulo, and has worked before the Supreme Court as well, so he has a very big curriculum. But everyone knows Commissioner Vitor very much. And please, Marcela, if you could introduce Alberto as well, that would be a pleasure to have you both here.
So good morning / afternoon in Alberto's case. Thank you both for being here. Alberto, as everyone knows, is an economist by training, but now today he is director of the Information Competition and Media Directorate at the DG Comp, which is responsible mainly for the implementation of the DMA at this point, and that's why it switched to the Directorate for digital platforms once the DMA started actually coming into force. And that is exactly the scope of what we are going to discuss here today. So again, as Ricardo already mentioned, Alberto and Victor, thank you very much for being here and for sharing your time with us in discussing this topic a little bit further.
Thank you.
And we'd like to quickly give the word for you, Alberto. If you could give us an introduction, framing exactly the point that we would like to discuss this morning, which is this morning here in Brazil. So what's your view actually in the enforcement of digital? We are saying digital remedies, but in fact we know that there is a difference between remedies in the enforcement in the European Commission. So these digital solutions that DMA has introduced some years ago.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to participate in this webinar. So yeah, I will make an introduction about the DMA. DMA now is a couple 2 and some years old. It entered into force in, I hope I don't get it wrong, in May 2023. But effectively, we had the process of designation and then the first obligation coming live only in March 2024. So we are talking about a period of just above 18 months. So first point I would like to make, DMA is probably the first on the blocks, but it's still a very young instrument. What is the DMA? Very briefly, it's a regulatory instrument. Technically, it's not competition law. It got its inspiration very much from the competition enforcement, antitrust enforcement here at the European Commission and the Europe more broadly over the past 25 years plus, but it's not a competition. It's not a competition instrument. It's a regulatory instrument. It's, as we say, it applies ex ante, and it's doesn't use the typical tools of antitrust enforcement. We have no market definition, no dominance. We don't need to specify series of harm, and there is no space for efficiency, if you want. So it, from a certain point of view, is a rather crude instrument. But that's also a little bit how regulation is with respect to antitrust enforcement. We don't sanction individual conducts, but actually through antitrust experience, we in Europe, there was the realization that there are some issues in digital markets that are systemic, and that's what gave the legitimacy to the legislators to have an instrument that basically says what is possible and what is prohibited. The DMA is also based on a closed list of platform services, called core platform services. There are 10 of them, operating systems, search engines, browsers, you name it, virtual assistants, cloud services, and more. I don't tell you the full list. And then there is a list of obligations and prohibitions. There are 21, 22, depending how you count them. And not all apply to every platform service. Some are bespoke to some services. But this makes quite a complex matrix between services and obligations. So this is the basis of the law. I know the very little I know about your project, about your bill, is that if the proposal is taking a slightly different approach, less prescriptive, more probably similar to the UK DMCC. The European system is rather prescriptive. So the first phase of the DMA was designation. So what services are in scope? We need to name them one by one, the company and the service. We have 7 companies under the scrutiny of the DMA right now that we call gatekeepers, and we have 23 core platform services that are in scope of these 7 gatekeepers, ranging from Alphabet, who has 8, to ByteDance, who has 1, and Booking.com, who has also 1. And so for these 23 services, all the obligations apply. As you can imagine, we get easily into the hundreds of possible obligations. So it's a lot. One thing we needed to do from the very beginning has been, given also the limited priorities that all agencies, I think, have, to share, to prioritize our action. And that we did in 2 ways. First was to maximize what we could achieve through regulatory dialogue, so something very new for a competition enforcement agency like Digicom, but basically in discussing with the gatekeepers, trying to find solutions without actually going through an adversarial process, but trying to find a mutually acceptable solution. And I would like to speak a little bit to those, because I think we have a quite long list of things we managed to achieve through the regulatory dialogue. For example, in Europe, as we speak, there are possibilities for alternative app stores to be on iOS. So to be on the iPhone, on the iPad. Apple never allowed alternative app store. In fact, if you have an iPhone, you know there is the app store. Now it's possible to have competing app stores on these devices. Also, we improved the communication between alternative app stores and users. One big problem for alternative solutions and offers is that usually they get drowned in a very long series, in a very difficult user journey that, yes, for example, on Android, you can in theory have alternative app stores, there are some, but the journey is very, very difficult. And people simply don't complete the process. People drop off before they complete the process, because we all know that there is a lot of friction, not a lot of patience to install things on the iPhone if things don't work perfectly. And on top, if the gatekeeper puts here and there scare screens, like, are you really sure you do this? This takes out of our secure environment, and similar things, people drop off even more. So we worked a lot discussing with the gatekeepers how to make the journey a bit fairer and a bit more simpler for users. And for example, Epic, which is a very big gaming, US gaming company, is the producer of Fortnite. 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, they made in a blog post, they said, now with the new user journey that there is in Europe, drop-off rates for people who start downloading our app store has decreased by 60%. So they have a much more up. Also, we got good achievement on the interoperability side. We had there we made an investigation, and we had decision towards Apple, but that was not in an adversarial context. It's what we call specification decision, in which we don't find non-compliance. We simply tell, in dialogue with the gatekeepers, how they should apply specific provisions. There is one provision in the DMA that says basically that third parties should have the same possibility as Apple to make their devices interoperable with the operating system of Apple. What does it mean concretely? You have, many makers of smartwatches, sports makers. Imagine bracelet, imagine earpods, imagine, vision goggles. All these alternative producers have a very difficult time sometimes to make their devices interoperable with the operating system, not because they are not good technically, simply because the protocols, the APIs, are not public. So this specification decision says how Apple needs to make public in a secure way a number of features that will allow, for example, having seamless communication or notification between the phone and smart devices, which is not the case today, having faster Wi-Fi connection, being able to cast better the data, having more data on the device, of course, if the user chooses to do so. This is another thing we think we achieved. Changing gatekeepers towards Meta. In Europe, the most popular messaging service is WhatsApp, and the second most popular is Messenger. And for these two messaging services, Meta has published the protocols for making these services interoperable with third-party services. So for the first time, a third-party messaging service, if the user agrees, can basically have access to all the contacts that are in WhatsApp. Now, this is something quite new. We started with one-to-one messages. We just added group messages very recently, last month, and video will come a bit later. But this basically allows others to use, we always talk about network effects, everybody in WhatsApp because everyone else in WhatsApp. This allows to break a little bit the grip of network effect. And here we have the first alternative service that rolled out. They are starting to roll out right now. And what is interesting is that these are those that like this opportunity more are not the competitor of WhatsApp. The competitor of WhatsApp, basically their business model is often not to be WhatsApp, to do something else, and more enhanced privacy or more specialized. But these are real startups. They are new ventures that they would probably not be able to come to the market because it takes an enormous amount of resources to build up scale. And like this entry cost is reduced to some extent. Now, the list goes longer and longer. I don't want to bore the audience too much, but I think if there are questions, we also achieved, we think, good results in data portability, both for users to be able to move from one platform to the other more easily, to be able to export things like photo contacts in a seamless way. Now, very recently also, it's possible in Europe, and I think they are doing that worldwide, to move eSIMs from Android to the iPhones and vice versa seamlessly. And people have more control about the data. People can choose if they want their personal data to be used or combined between services of the different gatekeepers. For example, I'm watching YouTube, but I don't want the personal data of my watching of YouTube to go and feed Google Ads service. So I can opt out. And this is possible across many combinations. So these are all things that the DMA achieved through what we call the regulatory dialogue. But one thing also that is obvious from the very beginning to us, that you cannot achieve everything through regulatory dialogue. Things, gatekeepers want to comply with the law. Most of them don't agree with the law. Some make it very public. They don't agree with this law, but they say, okay, we will comply because they are, of course, compliant companies. But the discussion becomes more and more difficult when the requirements, the changes that we require impact their monetization capacity and impact their business model. It's very understandable. We understand also sometimes the remarks we receive, but that is also the DMA is not only about agreeing, but also gives us the full toolbox to be able to act a little bit more like an enforcer. So if we observe that there is non-compliance, we can take action, we can open proceedings, we can sanction non-compliance, and we can also accompany that with monetary sanctions. So the other thing we did in the last 18 months is to do investigations on things for which the dialogue didn't work. And it was very clear from the beginning that just the dialogue wouldn't work. So we opened 6 cases like that last year. Of the 6, we closed 3. 1 without any sanction, because we were happy. It was towards Apple about giving choice screens on the iPhones to be able to choose what browser you want. That they did what they needed to do, we thought. So we closed that case. But on other 2, we closed the case finding non-compliance and with sanctions. 1, again, towards Apple, about not giving the possibility to developers to communicate with users directly on the phone about opportunities for users outside the phone. Just to give you an indication, we all know when digital goods are sold on iOS, on an iPhone, or also on Android, the developer needs to pay 30% to the gatekeeper. We thought this is unfair. The DMA says the developer should be free to communicate to their users about better offers. For example, they can say, if you go to subscribe to my newspaper on the website, we give you 3 months free, or it's costing less, or whatever other conditions, without having to pay this 30% to Apple or to Google. And in the terms of Apple, we actually sanctioned them because they were not allowing that in April. The other decision we closed with sanctions is towards Meta. I mentioned the possibility for people to choose if they want their personal data to be combined between services of Meta. We didn't find the agreement with Meta about how to combine personal data between the social networks, Facebook and Instagram in particular, and Meta ads. So, and we were not happy with the solution they rolled out, so we sanctioned Meta as well. On both these cases, we gave the companies until June last year to actually bring a better solution to the market. Now we are assessing if what they brought to the market is actually complying with the law and with the spirit, with the letter and with the spirit of the law. Finally, and then I close for the moment, we still have 3 investigations ongoing. 1, again, towards Apple and the alternative app stores. A lot has been done, but we think we can go a little bit further in making the contestability also on iOS for app stores. And so that's an ongoing investigation. And 2, we have towards Google. 1 very similar to the Apple one, giving the possibility for developers to communicate with users freely. And the second one is about Google search and the fact that on the response page, on the result page of the search, there are commercial offers that are Google commercial offers, and the DMA says that Google cannot preference, it was called self-preferencing, its own services that are not search, but there are other services on the result page of Google search. And also on these 2, the investigation is ongoing and also the discussion with Google.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alberto, for that initial overview of what has been going on. I'll hand it over to Commissioner Victor, and then we'll have questions after that. Thank you, Victor.
Okay, thank you very much for having me for this chat here. Good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in this IBRAC initiative. And especially, I'm very, very glad to be here with Alberto. I think that we have met before in other webinars. So it's a great opportunity always to talk with foreign enforcers and more specifically with enforcers involved in the implementation of the Digital Markets Act, which it's, of course, a very important landmark for the discussions that we have been handling in Brazil over the last months. So I guess that I could contribute to this debate here by highlighting some new aspects of this new Brazilian digital competition proposal that was submitted before the National Congress last month. And as you know, this proposal has emerged from an extensive public consultation during last year, which ultimately culminated into the Ministry of Finance final report, which engaged in a very, very intensive analysis on the foreign models of ex-ante regulations, and more specifically about the DMA, and it ultimately proposed a new model for Brazil. And I think that Alberto has given to us a very comprehensive overview about the DMA and all the proceedings ongoing under the DMA, and I guess that the details of this proceedings can be contrasted with the model that Brazil intends to put in place if this new bill is approved. So I would like to emphasize just maybe three aspects of this new bill, this new proposal. It was already registered under the National Congress under the name of Bill 4675 of 2025. And the name, the official name that was granted to the bill is Fair Competition Act for Digital Markets. Regardless of this name, the first aspect that I would like to emphasize here is the particular legislative architecture of the proposal. So different from the DMA, this new proposal is not a standalone provision, is not a standalone legislation, but rather an amendment to the current in place Brazilian competition law framework of 2011. So the first huge challenge that we can highlight here is that the Brazilian proposal performs what I would say it's an audacious legal experiment, because it intends to housing two competing ideological frameworks within the walls of a single statute. As we all know, the Brazilian competition law framework from 2011, it's pretty much endorsed by the orthodox view of the Chicago school that was very, very influential in Brazil during the 90s. So the original competition law framework provides very, very orthodox principles like the as-efficient competitor principle in section 36, paragraph 1, or even the efficiency balancing tests in article 88, paragraph 6. On the other hand, the new proposal tries to write new chapters in this very legislation. And I would say that the most relevant provision in these new chapters is definitely the proposed Article 46B, which completely disrupts this orthodoxy by introducing three normative goals that, in my point of view, sharply diverge from the consumer welfare standard paradigm. So the three goals are first, reducing barriers to entry; second, protecting the competitive process; and third, promoting freedom of choice. And when we look to these principles, it's inevitable to make some parallels to the goals that are outlined in the DMA. So when we say reducing barriers to entry, that resembles the contestability principle under the DMA very clearly. When we talk about promoting freedom of choice, I think that can be made a parallel with the open choice objectives of the UK DMCC bill, for instance. But an expert like Alberto may raise the question about fairness. So our new bill does not outline a fairness or not even a fair like goal to this new regime, and that's very interesting, because, as I said before, the official name of the bill is Fair Competition Act for Digital Markets, but the legislation does not provide any fairness goal for this new chapters. So I think that there might be a question whether this omission about fairness objectives constraints Cade's authority to address platforms, business, contractual imbalances, like regarding services fees, revenue shares, or excess pricings. And when we look at the DMA, it seems that some investigations, like the investigations that Alberto has raised, are very related to fairness goals. But nevertheless, on the other hand, as we are following from the EU experiences, maybe contestability and fairness are maybe just two sides of the same coin. And maybe this the fact that the Brazilian provision does not outlines the fairness goal may not be that problematic as we think. But and the second aspect that I would like to emphasize here is of course, the regulatory model that we are adopting or that we are discussing here in Brazil. As Alberto has said, the Brazilian model explicitly rejects the DMA self-executing model. So we do not have self-applicable provisions in this proposal. And in that regard, the Brazilian model tries to chart a middle ground between the German model and the UK model. So the regulatory model will operate through a two-stage process. First, we are going to make the designation of the gatekeepers, just like under the DMA. And here it's interesting to notice that the bill provides, I would say, it gives a more special weight to the qualitative criteria for this designation process. So it outlines that the gatekeepers should be considered under some features of them, just like having a lot of have a great amount of network effects and being present across several markets and things like that. So those are features that resemble a more ecosystem approach, I would say, to identify these gatekeepers. And on top of that, the Brazilian model, different from the DMA, does not split a difference between the designation of the gatekeepers and the designation of the core platform services. And I think that's a very interesting point that we should be very aware of, because the Brazilian provision just say in the proposed Article 47A that during the process of defining the special obligations of the gatekeepers, Cade may delimit these obligations to certain services or products offered by the designated economic agent. So we are going to have the first round of designation where economic groups will be designated as gatekeepers, and therefore it's only during the course of the proceedings to specify the code of conduct that Cade will eventually say what are the core platform services that should apply the obligations that will be imposed. And also, as discussed earlier, the Brazilian model does not provide for self-applicable obligations, but rather we provide free lists of non-exhaustive obligations. I tried to systematize these obligations here. I would say that there's 3 groups of obligations. The first one might be some transparency requirements. Those are outlined in Article 47A, paragraphs 1 to 3. There are some prohibited conducts, so don'ts, which are prohibitions of practices hindering competition through either defensive or offensive leveraging. And finally, there are some proactive interventions, which might be called remedies. So there are do's, which are outlined in Article 47A, Provision 5. So this is the whole model that we are facing in Brazil. And finally, I think there is this very interesting aspect of this legislation, which will prompt a lot of questions and debate in Brazil, which is what is going to be the role of economics in shaping and interpreting this new regime. So we see that the DMA, for instance, as Alberto has mentioned it, provides extensive recitals refusing the use of the more economic arguments. And the Brazilian proposal offers, I would say, minimal guidance in that regard. Nevertheless, the proposed Section 47A, paragraph 2, allows Cade to consider defenses based on 3 aspects, which are informational security, legal compliance with other regimes, and technical product aspects enhancing ecosystem functionality. It's not clear so far whether this list is exhaustive, but I guess that the intention behind the bill would be to deliberately put aside the more economic arguments about efficiencies and things like that, and delineation of relevant markets. That's because, in my point of view, the whole point of moving towards an ex-ante regime is, of course, trying to escape some hurdles of the more economic approach. So I guess that would make no sense to provide a new legislation and remains under these methodologies of market definition and analysis of efficiencies defenses that are more traditional to the traditional regime of antitrust legislations. So those are the 3 points that I would like to have made. And I guess that the Brazilian proposals is very, very interesting, and it raises a fundamental question about how a legal system like the Brazilian one, which is traditionally anchored in the Chicago School principles, can accommodate a new reality of a new normative goals, which are much more plural and much more aligned with a new perspective of competition policy approach towards digital ecosystems. So I stop here, and I think that we have a lot to discuss with our audience. And thank you very much again for this opportunity.
No, thank you, Victor. Very good overview of the bill, the current bill. We're now preparing some questions here. We'd like to make some questions, but just to make sure that the audience is invited to ask questions as well. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can put in the Q&A or the chat here, or if you can even raise your hand and we'll give you opportunity to ask your question directly to Alberto and Victor. So I think the first question is yours, Marcela, so please.
Sure. So thank you again, Alberto and Victor, for the comments. I think I'd like to raise an initial point that is is very aligned with what Alberto said before about the DMA and what Victor said right now at the end of his initial remarks, that these ex-ante regulations in the DMA in particular sort of aim to speed up the process of establishing obligations for digital companies, right? And that in the DMA case specifically, it has a lot to do with solutions that the DG Comp has found to problems that it has identified in the past concerning digital markets. So basically, the Commission kind of knew where some of the problems lay, and it decided to establish upfront what they should be addressed, that they should be addressed by some of the companies. And as Alberto was saying, like, we are now undergoing some debates regarding compliance. And well, there's different companies that are adopting different, approaches, let's say, to the issue. But some of these companies have proposed ways of complying with the DMA that the Commission understands are not sufficient, basically. What I wanted to know, and I think this is particularly important for us in the stage that we are in Brazil regarding the legislation, is if this is something that was clearly anticipated by DG Comp as a potential effect of the DMA. And, did you expect companies to question and debate the compliance efforts and for there to be different approaches, right? Each company is adopting one particular approach to that discussion, and basically how you're dealing with that.
No, absolutely. I think there is no surprise that compliance has been less than 100%. I think, given the breadth of the obligation that the DMA requires, it was clear from the very start that some of the discussion would not have been possible just by convincing each other. And that's why actually the DMA, with all the weight it puts on regulatory dialogue, also includes all what is needed for an enforcer to actually impose and enforce where necessary. That's also typical of the regulatory tool. Another thing to keep to bear in mind is that an ex-ante instrument that is new is not as ex-ante as one would wish, because when the DMA came into force, there were already business model conducts that were there and they were entrenched, and to some extent were also the motivation of why we do the DMA. But while for the things that will come and develop in the future, we can tell gatekeepers, be careful, because the way you design it now will impact your capacity to comply. For the past, there were things that were already there. I mentioned the lack of openness of the ecosystem, the fact that there is no other app store is allowed, or the fact that data was used, personal data was used very freely across services and so on. So there is an element that is almost by nature needs to go through radical changes in the way these companies operate. And it's also very normal that these companies believe in what they have been doing, don't agree with some of the asks, and of course will do everything they can within the limit of legality, but also within the discussion between the regulator and the regulated that can be sometimes very difficult. And they will do all they can to protect value for their shareholders, if you want. So there was no doubt that we would need to use enforcement. I think the challenge is to have the right balance between being tough on enforcing, but being tough only when the dialogue has really failed. And when we have arrived to the conclusion that often is shared, that there is no point in discussing further because we have very radically different views. On top of that, like all laws, And like all administrations, of course, we are subject to judicial review. And it will be no surprise to you that we have quite a string of court cases regarding the decisions we have taken. Not so much about the designations. We have a few about the designations, but I think relatively few. But all the other decisions we have taken so far, so we've taken 2 designation decisions, 2 non-compliance decisions, all 4 of them are in court. Again, no surprise. The gatekeeper didn't really like what the result was, and so it's absolutely within their within the right and the legality to see what the court thinks. On top, in the court cases, some of the questions relate actually to legitimacy of the act itself and to the proportionality of the act. So there will be very important judgments that will happen in the next few months that for us will be absolutely relevant to see if we are getting it right on that. Don't know if I answered all the facets of the question. We're very happy to elaborate further.
No, I think so, Alberto. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to know that this was something that was, in the horizon as a possibility, and that you were dealing with it in the way that you, already thought that the issue would pose itself. I think that Julia has a question as well. Julia, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So also, thank you both for the very interesting points you've raised. I also want to reiterate to our audience that we are fully open to your questions, so please feel free to speak if you wish. But my question, I think it's first for Victor, but I think both of you will have interesting views to share on this. So Brazil is now discussing implementing and eventually develop its own obligations or remedies for those digital players. And we know that they are active across the whole world, and they are already subject to certain obligations under the DMA. And of course, the Commission has undergone detailed discussions with them on how to develop remedies that are currently in place in the European Union. So from the Brazilian perspective, how do you expect to, let's say, balance the need to perhaps avoid some fragmentation in this global digital regulation while still respecting or observing local needs or local markets, local players that perhaps exist only in Latin America? So how to balance those two, the existing framework with what Brazil will develop?
Thank you, Julia. I guess that's a nice question. From what we are following so far, I think that we cannot expect that in the near future companies will still run the very same business model across all the jurisdictions, because I guess that during the last year or the next years, it would be very natural that new ex-ante regimes will pop up across the globe. And I guess that each regime might have its own singularities regarding the design of these business models. When we look at the DMA, for instance, for some companies, for some platforms like app stores, for instance, that Alberto has mentioned, and the DMA has some specific provisions regarding, for instance, the initial acquisition fee. That is very specific to the DMA. That model might be not followed by the US, for instance, if other models of alternative terms and conditions of app stores will be implemented in the US. So I guess that will be very difficult to find and to strike this balance that you have mentioned, Julia. But I think it's not a bug of the new ex-ante models. I think that's a part of the transformation path that we are seeing across digital markets itself. But of course, that will demand of the jurisdictions, and especially from the enforcer side, an openness to dialogue with other jurisdictions, and also to learn from the pros and cons of these new models and the new decisions that are taken by companies in addressing the compliance of the new legislations.
Okay, no
Please, I fully agree. Sorry.
No, just say please. Just give you the floor.
Okay. I fully agree with Victor. I think to state the obvious, the jurisdiction of a sovereign country ends at the border of that jurisdiction, and the DMA ends at the border of the European Union. There is no question about that. And then it is up to the company to decide if they want to look for a solution that actually is applicable, worldwide or region by region. And there are different elements. There are technical solutions for which there are economies of scope. To make two not so big example, but what I was mentioning of the eSIM, the transferability of the eSIM, I understand it will be rolled out worldwide. A couple of years ago, there was legislation in Europe, nothing to do with the DMA, that actually imposed to use USB-C cables for all mobile devices. Apple complained a lot, but then they decided, okay, we don't do it only in Europe, we do it worldwide. There are things, though, that we want to do only in Europe. What we are observing that to the extent that, for example, we give users a choice of how much of their personal data they want to use, or can be used for advertising purpose, is undeniable that a company that can use less personal data sells the ads for a slightly or sometimes significantly lower price. So if they don't have to do it in a jurisdiction, they will not do it. That is quite clear. So that is the choice of the companies themselves. I think what is very important between authorities is to avoid inconsistencies. So there are regional specificities, but it's true that we can also do things that make one thing and the other incompatible, and then we can create these economies. And that's something that is very, very important. And that's why it's super important to have a dialogue, to speak within authorities. And also, I must say, the companies should play ball a little bit more, because gatekeepers, they always tell us that we should ensure consistency across jurisdictions. My next question is always, will you give us waivers so we can discuss with our colleagues openly? And then you see that the mood changes immediately in the room. So that, if we have to discuss, we also need to have the basis to discuss. And if we are not allowed to discuss anything that is, a commercial, sensitive, or a business secret with another authority, the level of the discussion cannot get to the point where we would like it to be. So that's my usual plea. I don't know if there is anyone from gatekeepers in the call, but if there is, that's my suggestion. Number one, to help consistency across jurisdictions.
Thank you. Sure. I think it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, you. Yeah. So sure. Thank you very much, Alberto. Let me try to mix up different things here that we have discussed and split the question for you, Alberto, and also for Victor. So we have seen some companies that after the introduction of the DMA, they have delayed, or they have, I'll not say they withdrew, but they have delayed the introduction of some new tools, especially those related to AI-assisted technologies, for example. And my question, and probably I'm just figuring out here that probably they are trying to understand still the compliance system to be applied by the European Commission. But my question would be first for you, Alberto, to what extent has the DMA impacted those consumers, those European consumers, for having access to these cutting-edge digital services? How was that already predicted by the DMA or the European Commission before the introduction? And what would be the response from the European Commission of this potential? I'm just saying potential because maybe this would be predicted, but these potential consequences. And trying to align this for Victor, my question would be, you've mentioned, Victor, the Article 4.7, which is basically, in your view, is restricting the ways of companies of possible defenses for a company to allege. And from what we have seen of this bill is that it is a little bit different from the DMA. So the DMA, as Marcela framed the first question, the DMA was more related to an experience that the European Commission had with specific cases. And the obligations were provided upfront, so the Commission knows and companies know exactly what are the provisions and what are the obligations to be applied to them. But as we have seen, and you have discussed this, you have pointed this since the beginning, the Brazilian bill is a little bit different because it is much more flexible in the sense that Cade may evaluate specifically in each service, in each company, in each ecosystem, what would be the obligations and service that would be affected or not. So in what extent limiting this way of defenses, and will not be even justifications or way of defenses, but limiting the way of explaining these services and how it would affect consumers, competitors, intermediaries, and everyone in the ecosystem. How do you think that limiting this defense would generate these unintended consequences for the Brazilian bill, since we are not dealing exactly with the same experience as we have for the European Union? So I'm not sure if it was completely clear, but Victor, but I can explain. But I'll just give floor to Alberto to address the first issue.
No, this is an excellent question, and it's something we really need to pay attention to, because that could be one of the unintended consequences of overregulation that you stifle innovation. I personally will be no surprise to the audience. I don't think this is the case for the bill. It is true that for some feature over the past few months, gatekeepers said, I cannot roll this out in Europe because of the DMA. Typically, the feature, I mean, not all of them, because some of these announcements are very young, very recent, but for those of a few months ago, the feature has been rolled out a few weeks later. When they say we cannot roll it out because of the DMA, there is a big publicity to the thing from the gatekeepers themselves. When they actually roll it out, is much more quiet. Because I must say, there is an element, of course, of communication that is very appealing to say because of the DMA cannot do it. I don't want to go into the details of some of these, but for some, they were not just not rolled out in Europe, but they were rolled out in all the countries that didn't have American English as their main language. And then the rollout for the rest of the world was all more synchronized. Now, to say that this, that is the fault of the DMA in Europe is one thing. To say that is the fault of the DMA also because in Latin America it's being rolled out later, maybe is a bit self-serving. But that aside, I don't want to minimize the thing. But what I see is that the features come, and the reason why the feature can quite quickly, typically after they are rolled out in the US, is because Europe is an attractive market of 450 million potential customers. And it is in the interest of gatekeepers, actually, to roll out these features. Of course, maintaining security and maintaining integrity of the system, which are two features that the DMA recognizes as possible exception to not enforce certain of the obligations. But we want to have this discussion at the technical level on very concrete examples. It cannot be an excuse for all that we endanger the security of the system. And sometimes we see a little bit. But I would like also to go back very quickly to another aspect. This idea that regulation that is meant to open an ecosystem that is closed can stifle innovation, if you think about it, is based on the assumption that the only one who can actually provide innovation is the gatekeeper itself. And this is something we really contest. Actually, we think that by opening the system, that's where innovation comes in. And that's where competition comes in, because that's where very brilliant idea that can be perhaps a threat to the gatekeeper position over time, they have the possibility to come to the market. We know traditionally that it would be impossible to be on a mobile device if you don't do it at the terms of either Alphabet or Apple. So anything disruptive is killed in the cradle. So that's what we want to change. And now the balance of how much innovation we gain by opening the market and what the feature we lose or are delayed because the gatekeepers take a bit longer to roll out something in Europe, I think already now, after 1 year and a half, it's overwhelmingly in favor of more innovation. And I would, I'm very happy to debate that. I can tell you none of the gatekeepers agrees to this, but we are very convinced about it.
No, thank you. Thank you. Vitor, I don't know if you got the question. I can repeat yeah.
No, that's clear.
Okay, thank you.
But first off, I would like to say that I could agree more with Alberto regarding the innovation aspects and the innovation incentives. I guess that when we talk about the economics of innovation, it becomes very clear that any kind of statement making some links between some sort of regulation or competitive structure of some market and the incentives to innovation is very hard to be stated in a very clear way. The innovation, the economics of innovation is very, very in much way more complex than that. And as Alberto has said before, providing the business users the opportunity to compete in digital, across digital markets is very, very important for enhancing the incentives to innovation across those markets as a whole. So when we talk about innovation aspects, we cannot have this very strict vision that only the gatekeepers are the innovators in the economy. That is just not the full picture that we see in digital markets. But regarding Ricardo's question, I guess that this discussion about where is the room of efficiencies, defenses under the Brazilian new framework, they may be, I would say, less problematic than we are seeing in other jurisdictions. And I will explain why. As we said before, the Brazilian model does not provide for self-applicable obligations for the gatekeepers. So I guess that the debate about the economic defenses would be more important under a regime like the TMA, where the companies have to provide explicitly defenses for the interpretation of the legislation and the adaptation of this of its business models upfront. So before any sort of a statement from the authority. The Brazilian model that we are discussing here is very different from that, because I guess that Cade and more specifically the new general superintendents for digital markets will have the opportunity to dialogue with companies in crafting these new codes of conduct. And I guess that these experiences in drafting and in crafting this code of conduct would be no different from what we already have seen with Cade negotiating commitments with companies, and we have gathered a great amount of experiences in negotiating commitments with companies across many sectors and even with digital markets. So I guess that would not be so relevant because as Cade will define these obligations, and in a dialogue with firms, these questions will naturally be addressed by the moment that the code of conduct is being designed. So, but it's just a guess. I don't know if how correct that might be in the future.
That's if I can jump in, I think that's a good point that Victor raised, and that speaks to another aspect, which I think the EU and the DG Comp have a relevant experience that would be super important for the discussion in Brazil, which is like civil society engagement. I think that in a role like in Brazil, civil society engagement with the discussions regarding competition law broadly is very low. Like there's no, if we you know, go out of IBRAC, basically, the engagement is very, very minimal. And, you know, non-governmental organizations don't have the sort of tradition of focusing on this topic. But one of the proposals of the bill is to specifically open more room for that to happen. And I think that in the experience from the DG Comp and the EU, especially like the compliance webinars, seminars have been a very important place for that kind of interaction to happen. So I don't know, Alberto, if you could share, like, has that been true? Like, has this participation from civil society organizations been important for DG Comp or not? I would assume so, but also how to foster that, given, you know, it's in the interest of the agency for it to happen, right? To gather more opinions and more evidence. And, you know, on Brazil's side, Victor, I don't know how you see that, like what we would need to make the jump, right? To switch from being a very sort of like economists / lawyers and companies alone engaging in these discussions, and how it would be to actually engage more with these associations.
No, it's indeed, thanks a lot for the question. It's absolutely important. There are a few civil society consumer representation groups that have been extremely active also on digital, very helpful, often critical of what we do, but in a constructive way. I think in general, probably we could do with a lot more in Europe as well. And I think that speaks to an asymmetry of capability that is intrinsic in the markets. So if you have companies, they have very precise interests, and they can meet with allied companies to foster this interest much more easily. Brussels is a place where, you know, a big chunk of the population works for lobbies, associations, representations, and so on. For consumers, it's more complicated because it's much more atomized. So in terms of resources, capacity to mobilize resources, capacity to steer the debate, capacity to communicate, of course, the consumers' organization don't have the same capacity of companies with very deep pockets. That is quite still, they are extremely, I think they are crucial for the type of work we do. And in particular, because they are not polarized. Also on the, if you want, on the representation side, you have those that represent the interest of the gatekeepers, those that represent the interest of the companies that want to, you know, to open up the markets. That's very, very polarized. What we feel with consumer organizations is that they work genuinely for the benefit of consumers. They've been extremely useful, for example, in helping us or telling us what the user journey should be or what it should not be when interacting with the open system. The other aspect, perhaps to touch upon, is the importance of involving stakeholders broadly, so consumers, but other companies. Of course, we are a relatively small team. If we were double the size of what we are today, we would still be tiny compared to the capabilities of the gatekeeper. We still have a much less deep understanding of the system of the gatekeepers. It's unavoidable. It's often the case in competition enforcement. You deal with companies where they know exactly what they're doing, and they are probably the best or among the best at doing that thing. And you come, we are civil servants, bureaucrats, and we try to grasp that. So from the very beginning, we understood that we need other companies, other stakeholders to help us in this journey. And the workshops we did, so basically to ask the gatekeepers to come to present their compliance solutions and to allow a debate, a public debate, is fundamental for us to taste the pulse of the situation. If we make this process a bilateral process between the European Commission and the gatekeepers, we will not understand 1/5 of what we know, because we have other companies that come and they tell us what they need, and they tell us what is technically in their view feasible and what is technically in their view not feasible. For example, many of the gatekeepers sometimes claims about security or endangering security of the systems. If you have other people who come and they tell you, actually it is possible to have a secure system that is also open, or that often an open system is safer than a closed one because there is much more scrutiny and capacity to debug the problems. That helps very much when it comes for people who know the stuff really, and not just from us.
Perfect, Alberto, thank you. Victor, not sure you want to add something?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think the point you raised is very, very important. As you said, Marcela, I guess that we have a very close tradition in Brazil when it comes to dialogue with academic associations and civil society representatives at Cade. And our dialogue so far, I guess, seems to have been completely restricted to more technical circles, as you said, lawyers and economists from our community, and which, of course, is very high-level community, as we are seeing here in this very same event. And I guess that Cade is trying to bridge this gap through various procedures. I would definitely mention the public hearings that we have been holding this year, like the ones that we have held in the Apple case the beginning of the year, which was, of course, pretty much influenced by the compliance, the workshops that the European Commission has held as well under the TMA. And even last week, we have held another public hearing about a merger. That was the first public hearing addressing the concerns raised during a merger analysis in Brazil. And it's very interesting to notice that the new bill for digital markets that has been discussed in the Congress already provides that during the process of defining the gatekeepers' special obligations, Cade must conduct public consultations with the society. And I guess that's a very, very important law provision that is completely different from what we have seen so far. So definitely, and those are very essential for reducing the information asymmetry between the authority and the companies, especially involving such technical details and designing the new business models to comply with the new legislations.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Alberto and Victor. Just to make sure, is anyone like to have 2 minutes less? Anyone would like to make a question? Sylvia, please.
Thank Victor again for sharing with us your thoughts, and especially Alberto sharing the experience from the DMA, from the European Commission. So what kind of learnings and good practices would you have to share with us, since the European Commission is already ahead of us in the sense of implementing some regulation? And maybe just to give an example of experiences, as far as I know, you've been implementing some workshop with stakeholders to discuss some kind of practices and with the designated gatekeepers. How this experiencing is being, would you have something to share with us, the pros and cons, and if it's a good experience, a good initiative for us to implement here, something in this direction?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So, learnings, but for me, the first learning, after been more than 20 years doing competition enforcement in various sources, regulation is different. So it requires a little bit of a different mindset in relating to the companies. And it's some of the procedures look more like a competition procedure, a non-compliance procedure, have many of the elements of competition enforcement. If you want to do a market investigation, you do what we call preliminary findings. In antitrust, we would call statement of objection. So you give the possibility to reply. It's quite tough, adversarial. Then you try to find a remedy, solution. There is all that thing. Other things are very different. The regulatory dialogue needs to start on a different basis of much more, if you want, difficult to say at equal terms, but with a very open mind as to the solution. That's the first learning. The second learning, which is not very new, the asymmetry of information is massive. It is in every realm, I think, of competition enforcement, because we are specialists in applying the law, but we are always very ignorant about the markets and the products. And so to me, it's always to respect the people who actually have worked for decades in those markets, in those products, and genuinely they do all they can to provide good products, good services to the public, and to give value to their own shareholders. So, to not to have an arrogant approach. Although I must say, I've never seen an asymmetry as big as now, because these are the biggest companies in the world. That is not a matter of qualitative difference, but in terms of scale, there is still this asymmetry. The other thing is that to create a new team, there is continuity, but there is also disruption. For me, a big learning was to really get together the people who see the potential in the new instrument. DigiComp is, for like 30 years, we were doing three things: antitrust, merger control, state aid. And then in the same year, we got two new instruments, the DMA and also the foreign subsidy regulation. And for us, it was quite a revolution to have two things completely new, a bit unsettled in terms of procedures, a lot of things to invent. So it's very exciting, but it's not everyone's cake. So also to very carefully select the team that would work on this, that has sufficient eagerness to try something new. And that's and lastly, regarding the workshop, they've been hugely useful to us. We hope to the public as well. What the DMA requires is gatekeepers to produce an annual compliance report. And we thought, if we produce the report, we post it on our website, and exactly what we said, it will be the usual dozen of interested academics, lobbyists, and so on that we read it, but no one else. So we try to bring this a little bit more to the public. We are not touching the wide public, of course. These are always very technical matters, but there are things that also talk to, to the normal people in the street. Everybody cares about their personal data. Very few actually are ready to invest to protect their personal data. And that's the bridge we need to, the gap we need to bridge. But if we can bring these messages, now it is possible for you as a user to have more choice and to be more in control of what belongs to you, And the same is true for businesses, actually. I think that's the way to publicize a bit more what the DMA is doing, and also to have more adoption of the possibilities that is open.
Great, thank you very much, Alberto. Just we are past of our time, so very quickly, Vitor, just we asked about Alberto about his learnings, the Europe learning. So for you, like just to ask a final question, which would be, what's your view for the future? I mean, what do you think will be the next months, and do you foresee any timeline for the approval of the bill?
Yes, thank you, Ricardo. Since I guess that's my last intervention, I would like to thank you more generally for this conversation. It was a great pleasure to chat with you and with Alberto, of course. And I guess it's very difficult to anticipate what is going to be the future. We know that Brazilian Congress has a very busy agenda around several topics that are very important for our country, and so it's very, very difficult to see what are going to be the next moves. And of course, it's important to emphasize that during the legislative process, everything can change. And of course, we expect that the economic agencies involved in this discussion on both sides of the table will be trying to engage with the Congress and to express their concerns. And I think that's pretty much part of a democratic society and how the legislative deliberations might work under democracy. So it's very, very difficult to anticipate any move. But I guess that in the event that this bill is approved, I guess that will prompt a very interesting legal experiment in Brazil, because for the very first time, we will have, as I said before, two very different legal regimes housing by the very same legal statute. So we're going to have the more traditional antitrust, which will run will still run for more traditional markets. And besides of that, alongside of that, we will have a new regime that is pretty much based on a plural view of the normative goals of competition policy. It's not so easy to anticipate whether or not we can see some spillover effects in terms of this new ideology of digital competition policy will eventually influence the more traditional antitrust approach that we have been handling over the last 3 decades in Brazil. So because of that, as I said before, that performs a very interesting legal experiment for the future.
Great. No, great. Thank you very much. We are, as I mentioned, past of our time, so I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you also, Marcela, Julia, Silvia, Sofia as well. Thank you very much for being here. And you're always invited, Alberto, Vitor, to be with us. So we hope we can have next conversations. It will be a pleasure to have you here. So thank you very much.
Muito obrigado.
Oh, great. Yeah. We got to thank it in Portuguese. Thank you, Alberto. And have a very great weekend for all of you. Thank you very much.